Sometimes the most discouraging phase is not failure. It is when you are trying and cannot yet see what your effort is changing. That is the part people rarely prepare you for. Because if something is clearly broken, at least you know what you are dealing with. But this is different. You are showing up, doing the work, giving it time, giving it energy. And still, it feels like nothing is changing. You look at something you have been working on for a while. You have invested in it, stayed with it, tried to be patient with it. And yet the results do not seem to match the effort. That creates a very specific kind of frustration. Not just disappointment, uncertainty. The kind that makes effort start to feel unstable. You start asking yourself questions you did not ask at the beginning. Am I doing the wrong things? Am I not doing enough? Is there something wrong with how I approach this? And slowly, that questioning turns inward, into self-doubt. I've noticed how quickly that can happen. At first, you are evaluating the situation. Then, without fully realizing it, you start evaluating yourself. And that changes the emotional weight of everything. Because now it is not just, this is taking longer than I hoped. Now it becomes, maybe I am the reason this is not working. That is where it gets heavy. But what if that feeling is not as accurate as it seems? What if it is not that nothing is working? What if you are not yet seeing what is working? That is a very different possibility. Because progress does not always show up in obvious ways. Some things take time to become visible. Some changes happen before you can recognize them. Some growth is happening beneath the surface while the visible result still looks unchanged. And during that phase, it can feel like nothing is happening. Not because nothing is moving, but because your expectation is ahead of what has become visible. I think this is one of the hardest things about slow progress. It asks you to keep trusting movement you cannot fully prove yet. That is not easy, especially when you are tired. Especially when you wanted things to have clicked by now. Especially when part of you is already emotionally bracing for disappointment. Now here is the part most people miss. You usually measure progress by what is obvious. Visible outcomes. Clear results. External proof that something is moving forward. But not all progress looks like that. Some of it is subtle. Some of it is internal. Some of it is structural. You are thinking differently. Responding differently. Holding things differently. staying with things longer than you used to, recovering faster from setbacks than before, seeing patterns you would have missed earlier. Those things matter. But if you are only looking for visible outcomes, you may completely miss them. And when you miss them, you conclude that nothing is working. That conclusion feels solid. But very often, it is incomplete. Let me make this more real. You have been putting in effort, but your attention keeps landing on what has not changed yet. What has not worked yet? What has not happened in the way you expected? That becomes your evidence. And then your evidence becomes your conclusion. Nothing is working. But that conclusion is based mostly on what is visible, not on everything that is happening. That distinction matters more than it first seems. Because if your attention is only trained on absence, everything will feel absent. And when you are tired, that becomes even stronger. Fatigue changes perception. Things feel heavier. Progress feels slower. Uncertainty feels bigger than it is. I've noticed that when people are exhausted, they often do not just lose energy. They lose proportion. Everything starts to feel more final than it really is. A slow season feels like permanent failure. A delay feels like proof it will never happen. A lack of visible results feels like evidence that all the effort was wasted. That is why this requires a closer look. Not because you need false optimism, but because you may need a more accurate reading of what is actually happening. So instead of asking, "Why is nothing working?" ask something more useful. What might be working that I have not yet recognized? Do not rush that question, because it shifts your attention from absence to awareness, from panic to observation, from conclusion to curiosity. And once that shifts, something begins to stabilize. The doubt reduces. The pressure softens. The constant urge to declare the whole thing hopeless starts to calm down. Then slowly, you begin to see that things are moving. Not as quickly as you wanted. Not as clearly as you hoped. But not still. That matters. Because once you realize it is not still, you stop relating to the process like it is dead. You stop collapsing everything into one sentence. Nothing is working. And you start seeing something more honest. This is slower than I expected. This is harder to measure than I thought. This may be moving in ways I have not fully seen yet. Those are very different sentences. And they create a very different emotional state. So if you feel like nothing is working, pause. You may not be stuck in the way you think. You may simply be in a phase where progress is not yet obvious. A phase where more is happening than your frustration is allowing you to recognize. And once it begins to show, a lot of what feels confusing right now may start to make more sense. Sometimes the work is working before it becomes visible. Sometimes the shift is happening before it becomes undeniable. And sometimes what you need most is not more force, but a more honest way of looking at what is already moving.